Once upon a time, in a distant land, a king decided to find a new royal advisor. He summoned to his court 3 fascinating individuals of noted intellect to play His Majesty's clever game. 3 people sitting at a table and blindfolded hear His Majesty's instructions. Each of you is wearing a hat. The color of each hat is either blue or white. Understand that at least one of you is wearing a blue hat. When I remove your blindfold, your objective is to determine the color of your own hat. You may not speak to the other participants, and you may not remove your own hat or use any device to see it. The first person to provide a correct answer shall become my new advisor. However, the penalty for an incorrect guess is death. Oh no, don't worry. I'm talking about your death, not mine. Haha. You have 1 hour to give me your answer. If no one provides an answer in that amount of time, then I shall dismiss all of you and seek out a more capable group. The king removed their blindfolds. They nervously considered his words and began the task of answering the question, "What color is my hat?" After a long period of silence, one person glanced at His Majesty and confidently declared an answer. What was the color of that person's hat? Okay, time for an explanation. This is an example of an induction puzzle, and the idea is to consider the perspectives of different entities within the game. In this case, we'll look at different people sitting at the table. And essentially, there are 3 possible scenarios in terms of the hats. We have the case of 1 blue hat and 2 white hats. This is because the king tells us that, if you remember, there must be at least 1 blue hat. That's another way of saying that we can't have 3 white hats. So that gives us the first combination. Now we have to make an assumption, and the assumption is that all the people who play this game are smart enough to quickly realize that if you have 2 white hats across from you at the table, that you must be wearing a blue hat, because the king told us that at least one person was wearing a blue hat. So because of that assumption and the fact that we are told a good portion of time passed without anyone providing an answer, then we will say that this obvious scenario did not occur. And so we will exclude the first case. Now, this is where things get rather interesting. We're left with the possibility of 2 blue hats and 1 white hat, or 3 blue hats. And at first glance, it seems almost impossible to differentiate between these 2 combinations. This is where the induction aspect is so important, and the second major clue, which is we know that a long time passed without anyone offering a guess. Because remember, the king said an incorrect guess means death. So you don't want to play around with that. So basically, the way that we tackle this is we consider the perspectives of people at the table. Now, the first person who wears the white hat would see the same thing in both cases. That person would see 2 blue hats. Okay? But let's consider the person on the side. Doesn't matter which one. That person will see 1 white hat and 1 blue hat. Okay? Now, if you see that, we have to remember what we said at the beginning, that anyone who sees 2 white hats would very quickly provide an answer to the king, because that person would think, I must be wearing a blue hat because the king said at least one blue hat. So, if you are one of these people on the side and you see one white hat and one blue hat, then, and these are very intelligent people, you would think to yourself, okay, now if I were wearing a white hat, then this person would immediately give an answer, because that person would see two white hats. But since that person isn't saying anything, then I can safely assume that I must be wearing a blue hat. And it's really a race between the two people on the side to reach this conclusion. It's a race between them. They have an advantage over the person who sees only blue hats. But since that didn't happen, according to the story, we know that a long amount of time passed. We will now exclude this combination of hats. Okay, that leaves us with one combination. And if you think about it, it's actually the only fair combination for running a balanced game. The king wanted a new advisor, and this is really the only fair way to do it. But to arrive at this, we had to use induction. The king told us at least one person was wearing a blue hat, and the fact that a good amount of time passed without anyone solving it. Remember the main assumption that we had to make for this, and that is, if you see two white hats, you immediately know that you must be wearing a blue hat. If people tackled this puzzle who weren't really paying attention to what the king said, or just for whatever reason didn't put it together, then you could have people sitting in silence and still have someone wearing a white hat. But for the case of this particular riddle, or puzzle if you will, we're going to say that would not have happened. And therefore, we can say that the person was wearing a blue hat. This is actually an example of a hat puzzle, and you can find other hat puzzles on the internet if you look for that. And, this is actually my second video of this type. My first video, in case you missed it, was dealing with knights and knaves, also known as the two doors or two guards riddle. And so this was really my effort to provide a second video along those lines. If you enjoyed this, I would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to my channel, where your support will help offset my inherent laziness. And that's all for now. I will see you next time.